all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
Welcome, young adventurers. Dylan here, and on today's podcast, I have Mayank Mehta. He is a PhD in quantum physics and space-time. Since then, his research is focused on understanding how our brains create intelligent and abstract ideas such as space-time. They measure the activities in many individual neurons while rats investigate the virtual world. There is only a lab in the world to directly measure how the neurons respond to the virtual world and how the real world. Using this and sophisticated mathematical techniques, they were able to ask many fundamental questions, including how does our brains determine what is real? Their research has a wide range of applications, and from the education to AI and treatment of neuropsychiatric disorders. So without any delay, I'd like to welcome Mayank. Hey, brother, how you doing today?
Hey, how are you? Good to be here.
Glad to have you here. As we were saying earlier, welcome to the metaverse. And I'm so
That's right.
so glad you could be
I
here,
was
brother.
Meta before Meta came along.
Yeah,
I was
brother.
born Meta.
I know. I told you that. That's the thing. You should change your last name to just that symbol, right? Just that little like infinity
That's
symbol
right.
from Meta. So, hey, brother. So I'm excited to talk to you. And I'd like to first kick things off just a little bit, just so people have a bit of your background, understand your journey. And you're in a really unique field there of quantum physics and space time. Can you talk to me about your journey through space and time and how you got into this space? Yeah.
Yeah, that's thank you. I'm glad to speak about that. It's a long journey. That journey has been going on for many, many years. So I want to compress it in few key points. So I was born in a very poor family. Many of you have seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire. That's where my school was. And across the railroad track from the Slumdog Millionaire is where I used to live. So I've seen pretty rough things. And not a single student from my class except me went to college, let alone the rest of things. And so that got me thinking, he's my best friend. He's brighter than me. And due to financial resources, he could not make it. And somehow I got in. Now, along the same, while that financial and crime and all the chaos was going on, something weird happened in my brain. Mathematics seemed like obvious to me. I never had to study math, just obvious. I just used to fiddle around, take all the math books before the school began, and just solve the problems for fun. And my parents thought something was weird with this guy. So my mother, distinctly, I remember, used to push me out of the house and say, go play. Which I used to. So the weirdness started early on. In short, there was some weirdness. Long story short, I got some fellowship, God knows why. Got some donations, so got textbooks, somehow studied, got out of that whole thing. And then I thought, man, won't it be cool to figure out all those things I always wondered about? What are these bloody stars? They're always there no matter where you go. So I said, I'll study quantum physics. And I started studying, and lo and behold, and this is the message that resonates through the whole discussion today, because I was forced to study on my own. I had no resources. I had to make up half the stuff on my own. There was not even textbooks. Teachers were so poor, they didn't know the material they were teaching. So as soon as I got into the grad school, I asked some of the basic questions. What the hell is time? What is this time business? Space, I can say right here, right there. What is this time business? And I came up with my own theory of time in a matter of few weeks. And then the story started to turn virtual reality. So I wrote up my papers and I showed to my advisor, who was a very, very bright guy. He said, this is all bogus, doesn't make sense. I thought, how come things that I created my theory of space-time in a matter of 2 weeks? And my advisor, who's the smartest guy I have seen, he doesn't seem to get it at all. I thought, first of all, I was making a mistake, but eventually I made the jump to say I'm right. Those manuscripts got published in top journals, and several Nobel laureates said that, man, what you have discovered here is the biggest discovery since relativity. I kid you not. So this started to sound really weird. On one hand, some people think I have done bigger than relativity. I have my own theory of space-time. And on the other hand, people I respect think this is bogus. So where is all this? And at that point, I made a fatal mistake. which is to say, you know what? It's all in here. Mathematics is 100% in the head. Physics is what is in the head that you verify experimentally, but mathematics is entirely in the head.
Hmm.
So, what is this mathematics that we all seem to take for granted? Because clearly dogs don't have the same math that we have. They're pretty smart, but not our math. So, I'm going to spend just 6 months and figure out how does the brain create abstract ideas. Well, turned out that 6 months was a slight underestimate. I still haven't figured out
It,
how that works. And
mhm.
that's where I got into virtual reality and the brain.
See, that's, I mean, abstract ideas, which is, I mean, would you consider it to be
Yeah.
things like creativity? Would that be
Yeah.
complex
Yeah.
concepts? What's amazing with this, and I've had lots of concepts with these with people on the topics of when you're in an area that you create something that's somewhat novel and new, there is you almost always considered crazy. The idea is crazy,
That's right.
and
That's right.
then it goes into prolific, and then it goes
Yeah.
into common knowledge, and then it's like, well,
That's
duh,
right.
of course, that's the way it
That's right.
goes, right? And so it
Right.
sounds like you first started out that one where the smartest guy that you knew said, okay, that's crazy, and then you kind of slid into the prolific once you got announced, and now you know at some point we're going to get into the common knowledge, may not be there yet,
Exactly.
but that's the journey that you set. I'd love to learn a little bit because that's the one thing that I feel like humanity, the like AI is slowly eating away that what is people, right? They say like as science is slowly uncovers the pieces of God and goes away, right? And I feel that AI eats away at what humans can do. And one of the last bastions of space we have is what you're calling complex ideas or
Yeah.
creativities or those uncommon connections and
Yeah.
correlations, right? So could you talk to me a little bit? What is from your studies so far? What is complex ideas? What is
Yeah.
creativity? Where does it come from? All that jazz.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you touched upon a couple of very important topics.
Yeah,
Let me go through very quickly each one and then I focus a little more on what we have done. It
that's great.
seems like right now people have mixed opinion about AI.
Mhm.
Some very famous people have said that AI is going to destroy the planet. Hold on your horses. This is a bad idea. As you mentioned, many think it's going to chip away at everything and it'll take away what we are humans because the bot can do everything. For
Mm.
this, we need to look 100 years ago when people first came out, or maybe 200 years, I don't know history at all. But first time that people said instead of horses, let's use an engine. People were
Mm.
afraid. People were deathly afraid. The engines are bad. They're going to destroy the planet. They're dangerous. You cannot control them. There was the industrial revolution. Or those engines did not destroy the planet at all at that time. That's the catch. At the time, the engines did not destroy the planet. And here
Mm.
we are. You and I are able to talk. And if that jump humanity had not made, we won't be right now sitting comfortably in warm or cool houses and talking about these things. So that's a great thing. At the same time, it led to wars and bombs. And right now, the planet is in trouble due to those engines in ways that nobody could imagine at that time.
Yeah.
The same thing is true about AI.
Mm.
Human beings are human beings. Any tool that you make, human beings will put it to good use and others will put it to bad use. It's not the tool itself that's the problem. The good and bad is us, what we do with it. A knife we can use to chop vegetables or we can do something mean. So I'm not worried about AI. I think AI is there is nothing intelligent in the current AI at all. It's A. That's all there is to it, and that's a good start. Now let me come to intelligence part, which is
Mm.
where I got into the first place. So
Yeah.
I happen to have spent many years thinking about it. So my first thought was, man, mathematics, right? Here I am sitting with piece of paper and pencil, scribbling down some complicated algebras, Lie algebras, Grassmann variables, numbers to square is zero, crazy things like that. And it eventually made sense to many people. Mathematics is really it. It seemed like it to me. And hence, us humans are, of course, intelligent. No animal has it, and so on and so forth. But that didn't sound right to me because like we evolved from other creatures. So why would our intelligence all of a sudden appear in a flash without other creatures?
Mm.
Now, if I want to probe intelligence in other creatures, it's a good thing to do because it puts us on equal footing. And how will I even ask, right? I can ask you, some problem in calculus, but how will I ask that to a dog? But I know the dog is intelligent. I don't have the right question. That's where virtual reality comes in. So I
Mm,
started to think quite a bit long ago. Is it only a human ability to create intelligence? Is it just mathematics? Mozart clearly was intelligent. Somebody who made an amazing painting is clearly intelligent. So, what about animals? And if after a lot of thinking, it became clear that the intelligence is the thing that we are using it all the time. You're using it right now. So, you're looking at the screen in front of you,
mm,
and you see some bunch of light colored stuff in front of you. And if I were to ask you, Dylan, what's in between you and the screen? It's a space. So I said, all right, lift your hand and stick it about 6 inches in front of your head between you and the screen. You'll be able to do it. And I
mm,
ask you, okay, what's there? Where did you put your hand? Say it's space. Well, can you touch it? You can. Can you smell it? You can. Can you can you hear it? There is nothing. So all animals create this weird thing called space. We
mm.
only see walls and trees. Our brain creates the perception of space in between. And by the same token, we only feel certain events. Our brain creates that abstract idea called time. Now, these ideas all animals have, otherwise, they'll bump into each other. Not only that, the animal's ability of space and time must be exactly the same as your and my ability to perceive space and time. Otherwise, we'll bump into each other. Lions will eat all the zebras. Zebras are dead, lions are fat, planet comes to an end. Ain't gonna
Mm,
work. So,
mm.
in fact, the whole space and time starts to get even more interesting. Migratory birds go from North Pole to South Pole without GPS. We all know that. Pretty
Yeah.
amazing. But on the way, they dive and pick up tiny bits of fish, fresh, best possible sushi from the water.
Yeah.
The bird and the fish live in completely different medium. They never experience each other's world. Fish is always seeing the world with water, doesn't know what is there, can't fly, can't go fly. Bird never knows what is it to be inside the water. There's weird physics of refractive index, light bends, and all kinds of stuff. The bird and the fish are perfectly in sync despite completely different experiences and gene pools. If their perception of space and time was not accurate within millimeters and tens of milliseconds, once again, either all the birds get too fat and fish are eaten up, or vice versa.
Mm.
So that means that this thing called space and time that we are creating constantly is a universal operation that all animals do, despite the differences in their experiences, their brains, and their genomics. It
See, that's
turns out, yeah, go ahead, please.
so one of the things I find really interesting as we're talking about this topic is one of my fundamental things I've come across is I think we live in a couple of different realities. We live in our own internal mental model realities that we're taking in our narratives and our designs and what we say to ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, like that. Then we have this social reality that we live in, the reality that
That's right.
me and you are creating, that we're currently doing at the same time that we're going through this, whether through time and space, and we're using the collaborations. And then we also have the physical reality and or the virtual reality, which is the physical environment or the virtual environment that we see ourselves in. And what it
Right.
seems like is that we're OG virtual reality is your imagination, right? And so you have this pace, and then now we're co-creating this shared virtual reality, which is this social
Right.
reality. And then we have the physical, hard, actual, dimensional, physical reality that we're going
Yeah.
up to, that's physics. And so it sounds like what you've been studying in terms of that is really understanding how we perceive that reality, or the totality of the reality, moving from inner to social,
Right.
physical, and back through. And this is kind of the blending from the fish and the bird. They're in their own mental model realities. They have a social reality that they're shared, i.e. I eat you. And then they're going through the physical realities, and they're kind of touching where their physical realities are kind of at, they're somewhat disconnected, but they kind of merge at this little luminary space,
Very
right?
precisely. They have to
Mm,
merge very precisely. If
mhm,
all of a sudden the birds acquired the ability to be much faster than fish,
mhm.
then fish will be wiped out. Or if fish became just a little smarter, imagine if they managed to dodge a diving bird by just a blink of an eye, birds are wiped out.
Yeah.
So you see, the magic is hidden right in front of us.
Mm,
We think that all the amazing things we do, such as creativity, mathematics of various forms, that's where intelligence is. And we seek the AI to do those things. Here, actually, there's a magic that's happening right in front of us. There is one thing called space and time that every species on this planet is creating constantly because we walk around, the world changes, and they agree with each other 100%. They may not agree with each other about who eats whom, or what is delicious, or what is horrible. Nobody agrees with that. Space and time we create out of completely thin air, not even thin air out of vacuum, and we agree on it. Now, the
Mm,
things that you mentioned about the other spheres of space, such as
mm,
social space or,
mm,
or the space of my experiences. Now, scientists started to study where in brain is space created. About 50 years ago, pioneering experiments showed that actually there's a tiny part of the brain, more or less at the center of your brain, not the top of the part, which is the convoluted neocortex, but one of the oldest part of the brain. So old, it's called the old brain, Archae cortex. No wonder the old brain is the one that every animal carries.
mhm,
That old brain is the one where there are neurons that code for where you are in space. That was discovered about 40 years, 50 years ago, and they got the Nobel Prize for the discovery, rightly so, just about 5 years ago. But since the discovery of the part of the brain that creates information about where you are in space, few other things have become known.
mm.
It turns out that the same part of the brain keeps information about social structures as well. The same part of the brain is involved in creating perception of music. Musicians, that part of the brain is bigger.
Oh,
Same
interesting.
part of the brain is involved in Alzheimer's disease. It's involved in ADHD. It's involved in depression and schizophrenia. Things that you will never see are related. Alzheimer's patient famously can't remember what they had for lunch and so on.
Mhm,
Same part of the brain. So now you wonder, wait a minute. Here, a minute ago, we were talking about space and time, which are very solid physical quantities. We can measure in units and seconds, and they are very, very precise. How come that same part and the same set of neurons are encoding other weird things, which are highly subjective, such
yeah.
as social thing or my personal experiences? That's what we are studying. And the hypothesis is our working hypothesis, which means probably wrong. But
Yeah.
hey, that's what we got. It's a big problem, so we
Yeah.
got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Our working hypothesis is that as soon as an animal, the first animal was born, that animal had to wiggle. Maybe a little worm or a paramecium or something had to wiggle. Instantly, that animal had to have some network to create a perception of distance and time. How far did I go? Which direction I went roughly?
Mhm,
We believe that that same amazing hardware that takes in hard facts and create this weird abstraction called space and time, that same algorithm is then being used to create other realities, such as
mm,
social reality or my personal reality.
mm.
That's what we are going with. And it turns out that our recent publications show exactly that. But that took a couple of $1 million in experiments in virtual reality. So we get there.
So what you're saying is this is that the ability to move through time and space
Yes,
shapes not only what you would know of being able to actually map your environment and so you
that's
have
right.
kind of like you have a mental map on the physical reality, but then you also have another map which is the social map on
That's
top of this
right.
physical as well. So you're saying that the in order to function in this reality, we really are needing to we need to be able to first move around and get a
That's
calibration. We're
right.
basically the same way you'd move your phone like this through this
That's
space.
right.
So that's the
Exactly.
okay.
That's right. It's not just calibration, it
Hmm.
gets weirder than that. Let's
Hmm.
look at this computer. The computer hardware was developed to crunch numbers
Hmm.
long ago. Atomic bomb, Manhattan Project, all kinds of stuff. People developed computers. Once the hardware was developed, we are using that same hardware to watch movies, have a conversation. It's just like that. The fundamental algorithm that evolution developed over a billion years or so was how do you take hard facts, such as something is hotter, something is colder,
Hmm.
and turn them into abstract concepts such as that hot thing is far away, that cold thing is nearby. I should go towards the colder side, which is this way. It sounds simple, but that's a generalization and abstraction, two hallmarks of artificial intelligence, which they still can't do. We believe that structure is doing it constantly. It's doing so much that we don't even notice we are doing it. If I were to ask you space, well, yeah, of course there is space. Big deal. It's so obvious. It's literally hidden right under our noses.
Hmm.
Now, to get to that, how that is being done, that's the hard part.
And
So,
one
yeah,
and one of the things that, correct me if I'm wrong with, as looking at a bit of your studies and just trying to understand it from my own
yeah,
layman as point of perspective here, is one of the things that you found out is that the same tools of the brain that is using to understand space and time is also understanding music and our social relations and
yes,
a lot of other elements. So in theory, if you're able to sharpen the tools of the brain using one system,
exactly.
it will sharpen the same tools across the board. So,
Exactly. That's
okay.
exactly the idea. That's
Mhm.
exactly the idea that if we
Mm,
can do that, then we instantly make our so called generalized intelligence. People use the idea, we don't know if it exists or not, but that's like that. If you make the hardware faster, the computer is going to run better for everything, whether you're sending an email or doing complicated calculations.
mhm.
But in order to get there, it turned out we had to go through a small nuance, which turned out to be a really big deal. And
Okay.
that's what goes back to the difference between animals and us. Many animals, so we were studying rat brains
Mhm.
uh, because rat brains are simpler in many ways. So if we understand how space and time are encoded in a simpler brain, then we can carry over the ideas to very complicated brains of ours with complicated language and all kinds of stuff. So we let the rat run around in the maze like the amazing discovery 40 years ago, and we saw these neurons which fire in one particular place, so called place cells. Fine, that all worked out perfectly. But the next step made me think a little bit because the experience that the rat has is totally different than the experience you and I have.
Mhm.
When the rat walks around the world, his face is right there next to the ground. His mouth is about half a centimeter from the ground. His nose maybe 1 centimeter from the ground. His eyes are right next to the ground. His ears are next to the ground, and the whole world is up there.
Mhm.
The space that we are creating based on our experience, we don't even know what's really on our ground unless we trip on it or something. We don't smell the
Mhm.
ground unless it's really stinky. So it turns out when people looked into the human brain to understand how human brain creates perception of space and time, they didn't find these place cells. So there was already this dichotomy was going on that here, me, the meta, is saying that space and time must be universal. And I'm going on and on about how that's an abstract and amazing hardware. But if you go and look through what people are doing, then all of a sudden you find that the animals don't have it. So which is it? Is it that human beings, oops,
Oh, it looks like we lost you for a hot second there. Not too sure what he was going to say. It sounded like something pretty epic there. I think he might have accidentally dropped it, or he might have dropped the link with him going through that. It, I think we might have had a disconnection through time and space. But I'm just going to talk for a minute just to kind of reiterate and restate and rethink about what's been going on here in terms of understanding this technology. And so Mayak here has actually been going through and he's been really breaking down the understanding of how does time and space relate to the animals, like doing studies on rats, as well as working in it with people to really break that down and say, okay, what is the time and space and how does that relate to everybody? I believe he's going to come back here in a hot second when he reconnects. What I think happened, and this is my guess what's going on, is that he accidentally unplugged his internet. And so or didn't have his laptop charge plugged in. And so he unplugged it and then got disconnected from this area in this environment. Not too sure what it is, but we're going to wait until he comes back and get into this. But this is a fascinating topic. One of the studies that he did is one of the things that he did, and I think he's coming back into this, is he studied rats' brains to see about the effects that virtual reality had to actually see, does it actually help with Alzheimer's? Does it, if you can run a rat through virtual reality, can you actually use the virtual reality environment to sharpen the tools of the brain of the rat to be able to then help that rat not only understand the lay of the land, but then also to map that out backwards to actually fix things like Alzheimer's, the understanding of music, and all these other things. And this is one of the things I'm actually really excited to talk to him about is can we use virtual reality to actually be able to train the brain, sharpen the tools of the mind to be able to do this? He's back, and we're going to actually ask him right now. Welcome back, Mayak. I know that you
Sorry.
it's all good. My guess was, did you have your laptop unplugged? Is that what happened? Did you?
Actually, the laptop was plugged in, but the power wasn't turned off.
Yep.
And I got no warning. It just turned off. So I'm
Yep.
really sorry.
It's all good. That's okay. I was kind of recapping just a little bit about what
Yeah.
you're talking about through space and time. I talked a little bit about some of the rat studies you've been doing, the effects that virtual reality
Yeah.
has in the brain, the possible effects it has for Alzheimer's. Some of the reasons why I was
Right.
interested to talk to you about all of this, but just want to kind of keep it moving
Yeah.
along as you kind of hopped off there for a second. But please, you were talking right now about what is true? Is it the space and time? Is it in reality? What
Right.
is it true inside the rat's
Yeah.
brain or in the human's brain? And where have you been
Right.
led up to that with your studies so far?
That's exactly right. So, as I was mentioning, that on one hand, we have this hypothesis that space and time must be universal.
Mhm,
If a logical experience shows that it must be so, otherwise, how the hell? But when we looked inside the brain, and many people before us looked inside the brain, they found that though called space neurons, they
mhm,
behave like space neurons in a rat brain, but not in a human brain or in a monkey brain that some people looked at. It was not very clear at all. And clearly, we are more advanced in evolution. So, if at all, the space neurons should be much better in our brain, not worse. And then, what the hell has that got to do with Alzheimer's disease and why Alzheimer's patients not only are lost in space, but they're also lost in conversation? What's
mhm,
the relation between space and conversation? So, all that was getting complicated. So, we thought one way to do this is to let the human beings behave like rats. So we go on all four. We start walking on the ground with our nose next to ground. Not the best idea because our life is in this space, not in that space.
mhm,
So we thought, what if we do the other way around? This was about 12 years ago when most people didn't care for virtual reality. We thought, what if we built a virtual reality for rats? We want to make sure that virtual reality is a happy virtual reality, which means that rat goes into it happily. He walks around and he finds little treats buried in the virtual maze. So it's a treasure hunt. So we checked. The first thing was it's a wild idea, right?
mhm.
If I were to go and tell a funding agency, as I did 12 years ago, say, hey, in order to figure out Alzheimer's disease, we want to train rats to play video games. And pretty much the response I got was, get out of here. It's as bad as me telling them, in order to figure out Alzheimer's disease and artificial intelligence thrown in, let me make rats watch television. Sounds
Yeah.
totally moronic. They're not going to watch TV. So why the hell will they play VR?
Mhm,
So we had to become rat psychologists. And by we, I mean amazing set of team members, psychologists, engineers, physicists. We all sat together. We made lots of different versions, which were totally duds. And a couple $1 million later, we built a virtual reality for rats, such that the same virtual reality is the one where human being can be plugged into. Exact same virtual reality. So now rats and humans can have the same experience. A
mhm,
very new step in history of evolution that rats and humans are having the same experience. We put the rat in it. We want to check, do they buy into it? So we put them on a virtual table.
mhm.
When they go to the edge of the table, will they turn away? Like a normal rat in the real world we do. But here, there's nothing to fall. There's nothing to really fall off or something. Second trial, first trial, rat went to the edge of the table, got stuck. Second trial, turned away, just like that. Third to fourth trial, the rat went up to the edge of the table and did a moonwalk, walk backwards. So they are creating this space, concept of space,
Yeah.
the kind of space that they have never seen in their entire generations of rat life. Never seen it. So then we thought, okay, that's two-dimensional space. Can they do 3D? So we hung little chandeliers on top, just in the virtual reality, little chandeliers on top, just they were there, just for the heck of it. Will they notice? As soon as the rat goes in, they straight away look at it and they freak out, say, oops, this is weird. And we thought, man, the experiment is busted. In 1 minute, the rat goes underneath the virtual chandelier, stands up and tries to touch it with his snout. But there's nothing there.
Yeah. He's trying to calibrate the distance too. Okay,
Exactly. So they totally bought into it. After we start to give them treats in virtual space, every space, as far as rat is concerned, is equally stinky, equally comfortable, whatever the thing that they like. When they start to take naps in virtual reality, we knew that they really liked the place. They just chilled out and took a nap after getting some treats. And like the real world, they took naps at the places where they got the treats, even though it was the same place.
That's
So
so
this was totally amazing to us. We never expected in our wildest dreams that rats will totally buy into it. In fact, they like the VR just like the VR gamers in human being. We take the rat and bring him next to the virtual reality shell and see if they jump in. As soon as we bring them in, they jump straight in and start running.
that's
They're
so
ready to
fun.
go.
So
So then we thought, yeah,
it's completely believable. Well, for them, it's at least believable enough to actually.
yeah,
Okay, there's danger. There's rewards.
yeah.
I mean, all of it. Well,
There's something curiosity. There's a
reptile
treasure. That's
brain.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can I die?
yeah,
Can I eat? Can
yeah,
I? Well, I
exactly.
don't know if there's any fornicating with other rats in there, but it
Yeah,
sounded
not yet, not yet.
not that's phase two of the metaverse. You know, I mean, I get it.
That's
I
right.
get it.
That's
It's
right.
coming. Yeah. Okay.
So then we thought, all right, this is working. Now we ask literally the $2 million question because
Yeah.
building all this took quite some effort. We listened into those neurons in the rat brain while they were walking around in virtual reality.
Mm.
That just blew apart every expectation we had and anybody else had. Published in several publications over the last 80 years in really, really top journals and so on. So many people have looked at to check if we are making this up. The first thing that happened, as soon as the rat went into virtual reality, that particular part of the brain that makes space and memories and music and all that stuff in humans, more than half of those neurons shut down simply. So that's something. Now, here is the major twist to that, right? We didn't expect this. Nobody expected this. More than half the neurons, when the rat go into virtual reality, simply shut down. They're not dead, they're not harmed. We bring the rats back to the real world, the neurons are there, they're happily chirping along. But when we put them in virtual reality, they go silent. Why is that? So at that point, there was an editorial in Science magazine which said that living in the matrix takes less energy. That's the gist of it. Because when
Mm.
you're in the virtual world, the world is much simpler. That's why the virtual reality is virtual and not real. It gets to the heart of what is real and what's not virtual. In virtual reality, your eyes and your ears tell you where you're going. At best, the sounds change based on where you go. The lights change based on where you go, but the smells don't change. The touch doesn't change. You feel the same texture everywhere. In fact, your entire body, your viscera, because when you move around, your body tells you what is your acceleration. There is no acceleration.
Mm.
That's why that virtual reality is virtual. Only half the things are as real as the real world. Other half are actually at odds with what is real. And the
Mm.
remarkable thing is that this experiment of putting the rat in virtual reality showed that these half the neurons in the rat's brain could tell, this ain't real. I'm checking out. This is too simple. I'm checking out. We put the rat in the real world where all kinds of things are changing, not just sound and light. The whole force of the rat brain is brought in. So that's number one. It turns out this thing is a major application. There are several diseases where people suffer from, such as epilepsy or Alzheimer's disease, where this part of the brain becomes hyperactive. Too many neurons are active.
Mhm.
There are no drugs to make them quiet, because if you start to quiet that part, the rest of the body and brain gets quiet too, and that's not a good thing. That's a pretty dangerous thing. Now we have a potential therapy. We can use virtual reality to temporarily shut down that part of the brain. Isn't that amazing? So we want to partner with pharmaceutical companies, with patients, and so on to say, can virtual reality help to just quiet down that part of the brain? Is it beneficial or is it harmful? We don't
Mm.
know. We want to do that. So that's one major surprise. The biggest surprise, perhaps.
So looking at
Yeah.
that real quick, so one look at this, and so you're saying that by the rats going through the virtual environment, and because you're only using like less than half of your senses,
Yeah,
right? You're not using taste or smell or
exactly.
touch
Exactly.
for the most part. You're pretty much using sight and sound. Then the part of your brain that is mapping out space and time and social, all
Yeah,
that stuff is not as active. And so because of that, it calms down that part of the brain. And
that's
this is
right.
the cause of the Alzheimer's and some of these other situations is from being overactive and overstimulated, which is the
Yes.
hippocampus and those types of
Yeah.
areas. Okay. And then were you able to look at this at all? Because I know that it also, I'm not entirely versed on it, but I know with Alzheimer's, there's issues with the protein issues and
Yeah.
there's other,
We
other
want,
issues. Yeah. So how does the overactive part of the brain? Because I think it's about it causes plaque and it causes it to get sticky and that kind of
that's
stuff.
exactly right. That's
Can you talk?
exactly right.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because I understand that to a degree, a bit of that, and
Yeah.
how does the overactive cause the stimulation of plaque and that kind of stuff?
First of all, we don't know.
Okay.
That's the simplest answer. And in fact, it's highly debated whether it's A beta, the protein that's causing Alzheimer's, or the A beta agglomeration into so called tauopathy that's causing Alzheimer's. We don't know. But one thing is fairly agreed upon that many of these proteins travel through the neurons, across neurons through the synapses. Now, it sounds possible. We haven't tested it, so I should put it in big, big caveats, working hypothesis. We don't know this. What I'm going to tell you next is not something we have figured out. That's something we want to figure out. That when you make that brain quiet, the spread gets quiet too, because things are not connecting to too many things, things may not travel.
Mm,
That's what our hypothesis is. So we don't know. We need to do this. But what I'm going to tell you next gives us even more confidence that this may turn out to be actually a therapeutic value and a diagnostic value for sure. So are you
mm.
ready for me to jump into that before, or should I answer any question?
No, those things are yeah. All of science there's
Yeah,
science and then there's applied science and there's understanding what works and things. So and as
yeah,
again moving from the crazy to prolific to common knowledge,
right.
what it's making me think about. I know
That's right.
there's other things with virtual reality and things that are out there that have some effects. Like I know with like phantom limb syndrome, there was the thing
Yeah,
where you had the stick hand and then
that's right.
if you see the mirror of the hand, it then loosens up your brain thinks about it, and then you let go of that phantom pains. So I know those are
Right,
things that have actually been it went from a hypothesis to being applied, which is really interesting
right.
science. So I'm just wrapping my head. So yeah, I'd love to learn more about that. What was you
Yeah,
said you're moving on to the second phase of the
yeah,
the unobvious discoveries that make you
yeah,
question what's really going on.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So then we thought, all right, so this was the first part, neuron shutdown. Whoa. All right,
Yeah.
has something we got to figure out. In fact, until now, for many of these diseases, people have been developing drugs to turn on and turn off the part of the brain. And they can turn on and turn off the neurons by like 10, 15%. This is 60% without any drugs, instantaneously turn on and turn off. So what this tells you is that once we start asking fundamental questions and do solid work with new technologies, the brain is going to tell you what to do rather than you going with preconceived notions. It just threw up this. Nobody expected this. Now, the second thing
Mm,
I'm going to do is along the same lines. If I were to say a few words to you that Mary was walking around and she had a lamb, you may or may not remember. But if I sang it out, Mary had a little lamb, you might remember.
mm,
So we know from our so-called cognitive experience that if we experience something where the same words came with music, we remember it better. Why
mhm,
is that? We don't really know.
mm,
I certainly don't know why is that, but there is an analog of that, which is in the brain too. It turns out that as soon as the we start to do any task which is cognitively challenging, such as me walking the maze in the room, the neurons in hippocampus, individual neuron not only codes for space, but the collection of neurons start to develop a rhythm called theta rhythm. And I'm going to tap it out for you. Let's see if you can hear it. It goes like
Okay.
that. That's about 8 times a second. Four fingers. If you complete all of that twice in a second, you get 8 times a second. The whole hippocampus starts to get activate this ancient rhythm discovered 70 years ago called
Interesting.
theta rhythm.
Hmm.
Now, the funny thing is, so that rhythm is there when the animal explores space. That rhythm appears in human brain when we are trying to do a cognitively challenging task. Interesting correlation,
Hmm.
but not yet a cigar. It's just an interesting correlation. Now, the second thing happens when diseases such as Alzheimer's or other neurocognitive or neuropsychiatric diseases that affect hippocampus happen, the theta rhythm gets weaker and the people's cognition, memory, attention, all that gets weaker.
Mm.
So pharmaceutical companies have been developing lots of therapies to boost that rhythm called theta rhythm. In fact, if you simply Google theta rhythm just now, you'll find like 70, 80,000 publications. So it's a huge deal.
That's
We thought, all right, yeah, go ahead.
that's fascinating because I think there was something around showing there's theta waves. I know MIT had a study around gamma. I think it was
That's
gamma
right.
showing 40
Right.
hertz and doing
That's
it
exactly
inside,
right.
and you can show in the eyes and it would break up the
That's
plaque or
exactly
whatever
right.
what's going on. So
That's
so then
right.
the how does so the theta waves and the gamma waves, and because you're talking about 4 to 8 hertz versus 40 hertz. What is I'm still wrapping my head around
Please, please.
the
Good
concept. Yeah.
question, actually. So,
Yeah.
gamma waves are the ones which are going at the pace of about 50 times a second.
Hmm.
So, in 1 second, you'll have 50 gamma waves. This go up
Hmm.
even faster than that. That's gamma waves. Theta waves are very slow. They go more or less 8 times a second, very precisely. Let's say in the rat brain for sure, it's 8 times a second.
Mm.
Remarkably, when they put electrodes in human brain, theta rhythm was slower. It was around 4 times a second. You would think humans are faster and theta should be even faster. Maybe, maybe not. But lo and behold, when people put electrodes in the human brain, they found the theta wave was 4 times a second, not 8 times a second.
Mm.
So that was another little puzzle. Why does theta rhythm come up when you do cognitively challenging tasks? Why is it that it gets weaker when you have some diseases that affect hippocampus? And can we forget why and so on? And can we simply fix it? Can we find a therapy that boosts theta rhythm? See what happens.
Mm.
Pharmaceutical companies have tried the third thing for the longest time. There's been some benefit, but not too much. We thought, let's look into it. One hypothesis is rats' experience is right next to the ground, all kinds of different experience. Let's check the theta waves in virtual reality. And that's a paper that appeared just about 2 months ago in Nature Neuroscience. Another bombshell kind of thing in our little world.
Mhm.
That theta rhythm was twice as big in virtual reality than in real world. And when we saw this, we said, wait a minute, this is too good to be true. So let's check. So we put the same electrode in the same part of hippocampus. We took the same rat. We put the same visual cues on the walls. We made the virtual maze very simple. He has to just walk in a straight line. So there's no complicated stuff. He has to walk either the real world or virtual reality. Same cues everywhere. Whopping, almost doubling of theta rhythmicity in virtual reality than real world. So now we found a way to boost theta rhythm without drugs by an amount which is far greater than any of the other drugs.
Mm.
Would have never guessed why that happens, but it happened. And the story gets even better. And I'm
Mm.
going to let you ask a question after that because I know you're waiting to jump in. But let me tell you one more little
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Go for it.
Then we look closely. It turns out that neurons are very, very complicated objects. People say our brain is special because you have 100 billion neurons. Well, your foot has 100 billion cells. Your foot is not as exciting as your brain. I
Mm.
am sure that's true. At least I think it's true for me, but I
Yeah.
don't know about everybody else. The reason is that neurons are very long objects. Every cell in your body is about 10 micrometer or so in diameter, just like the size of a bacterium. But neurons have these long processes called dendrites. That's where all the memories are stored. Those dendrites are 1,000 micrometers. What we found is that this theta rhythm, which like many people had suggested, lives in the dendrites of the neurons, not in the cell body. When we went and looked in virtual reality, exactly in the cell body, the same slower rhythm that appears in the human brain appeared, but only in virtual reality. So, to summarize all that complicated things I just threw at you,
Yeah.
that the rat simply by being in virtual reality, the hippocampus develops much stronger rhythm, and the rhythm starts to look much more like the rhythms in human brain, which means, and the rhythms get bigger, especially the rhythms which are so-called beneficial for human beings. Those rhythms get much bigger in virtual reality. We even give it a name to this rhythm called eta rhythm. There's a bit of joke there because theta, and if you take half of theta, you get eta, and in Greek, eta means half. So that's some humor. So there is this other fascinating thing
Mm,
that not only we can turn on and turn off neurons in virtual reality, so far we can simply turn off. We want to develop technology that we can even turn it on. So you can simply choose the virtual reality based on your desires, and you can turn on and turn off neurons. This is within the reach of technology. Within the next 5 years, we can do that. The second thing is you can change the brain rhythms by putting them in certain kind of virtual reality. We can change the frequency of the rhythm, we can change the pitch, we can change the amplitude, things that nobody could even remotely imagine was possible. Just put on the VR and we can do this. So that's a tremendous possibilities are opened up with this.
yeah, what I'm really interested in is always when you can stack things that have been proven at least to some degree to be effective. So let's just take, for example, and so I'm gonna throw a couple of things at you. You tell me what your
Yeah,
thoughts are around this. So what if you had some sort of virtual reality system, right? And
yeah,
what you had is you had them going through a maze, and let's say for say Alzheimer's patients, you did something that
exactly.
was you had something that was you just by putting in the VR and have them move through, we call it a memory palace, and maybe
That's
there was
right.
a memory palace along
That's
with
right.
music, and then you're combining those things together, and so you're
Yeah,
stacking, and almost like imagine like what's the usually it's like whenever you're trying to strengthen something, it's a combination of things. Is it fast twitch? Is it slow twitch? That kind of thing. So
that's right.
it's usually both. So you're saying maybe if you oscillate between the theta rhythms, the eta rhythms, the gamma rhythms, as you rotate through those ones and you build it into some sort of memory palace system that's got some sort of
Very nice.
then those types of things, if you stack those things all together, then it could have a compounding synergistic effect that could possibly um, help with Alzheimer's or overall just strengthen that part of the brain so that you overall have strengthened those tools so that you can actually be able to function and have more cognitive enhancement. And just kind of my
Exactly.
basic thoughts around that. But what,
Excellent. So you summarized it extremely well. That's exactly
mm,
the working hypothesis. I may throw in a lot of technical words into it, such as
mm,
neuroplasticity, NMDA receptors, and certain neurotransmitters
uh,
such as glutamate and GABA and the cell body and dendrite. All that stuff is there in the science of what we are doing. But the bottom line is this, that depending on the way in which different sensory experiences are combined, we can build memories, we can make memories, and even complex abilities such as abstraction and creativity, we can boost it. Potential,
mm,
we haven't shown this. But the correlates of that, such as theta rhythm, eta rhythm, and the number of neurons active, that much we have certainly shown that by simply putting a rat in VR, we can change gigantic properties of this network, and
mm.
we feel fairly confident, with the full confidence of a scientist who has no idea what's going to happen next. But I'm super stoked, and I would say certainly a viable hypothesis to test.
Mm.
Given
So,
that drugs have failed completely,
yeah.
I
Well,
believe that, yeah,
so with that, let me ask you this. Okay, so then, what do you think in terms of like the holy grail with this thing? You know, the hopes and the aspirations with being able to make this. What do you like ultimately want to do with this research and stuff like that? What do you feel is kind of the end game flag in the sand, holy grail place that you're trying to go with this? Assuming that some of these hypotheses do prove out to be true.
yeah. So let's build this. So let me step back to reality first. and go steadily from something that we can do in roughly 2 to 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
then what we can do in 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe complete moonshot. So let's go in that way.
Sure.
Moonshot, I'll tell you the very last. Let me start with the thing we can do right away, which
Mm-hmm.
can be useful.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is let's take on a huge number of people who are suffering from a variety of neurocognitive disorders, either ADHD or Alzheimer's or memory deficits or depression and so on. This, as I mentioned, this part of the brain is implicated. Now, what can we do now? Because all we have shown is that we can turn off neurons and boost rhythm. We have not really shown anything about whether it benefits the person or not, because that will take time. Now, what can we do? We don't want to completely ditch the pharmaceutical route either. Let's learn from why is it that despite the best of the scientists working in curing these diseases, they have not been cured. Because we can learn from it rather than just going completely in empty space. So I looked at the literature quite a bit. Why is it that Alzheimer's hasn't been cured?
Mm-hmm.
Well, fun fact, bad pun, but fun fact, Alzheimer's has been cured in rats and mice. In fact, there have been easily a dozen different drugs from major companies like Pfizer and Eli Lilly and so on. They came up with several drugs that actually worked in rats and mice. It cured the plaques and A beta and all that, and their cognition was improved too. But when they tested those drugs in the very, very expensive so called phase 3 clinical trial in human, which are very expensive because you have to have placebo control and you can't just inject drugs in human, rightly so, the drugs actually failed in humans.
Mm-hmm.
They worked in rats and mice, failed in humans. So I believe one reason is that A, the when that they're so I thought let's look into how are they testing the rats, because if I were to interview an Alzheimer's patient, I might ask, what did you have for lunch and where is your home? I can't ask that to a rat because there's no way I can communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So the way people have been testing the rats to see if they have good memory or not is the following. It's a classic test called a water maze. If you simply search the word water maze in hippocampus, you'll find about 100,000 citations, gold standard until now. What you do is that you know that if you simply ask the rat to say, go find a treasure somewhere, they're going to cheat on you and they're going to leave a little scent trail on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So to prevent the rat from cheating, because we can't put the scent trail on the ground, what they do is they take a tank of cold water, they dunk the rat in it, and he has to swim in that cold water tank because he's freaking out. Jesus, I'm going to drown, and I'm super uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Unknown to him, under the surface of the water, there's a platform. So if he reached there accidentally, he can stand on top and now he's not drowning. So that's a classic test. When people develop these Alzheimer's drugs, or for example, any other neurocognitive drug that hits hippocampus, as I mentioned, there are dozens of these unfortunate diseases, they test whether the drug works or not by giving the drug and then checking if the rat escapes to that platform to save his life. Seemed like a good thing. But
Mm-hmm.
as we know, the circuit which is involved in fear and escape is amygdala and related circuits. That's a totally different kind of memory, the kind of memory that kind of gives you PTSD, the kind of memory
Yeah.
you don't want to remember. So we thought, won't it be nice if we tested the rat in a happy memory case rather than a fearful memory? So there we built a virtual reality. This is the latest publication that came out just 2 weeks ago. It's not
Mm-hmm.
even in print yet. It's going to be in print in 1 week from now. It's in Nature, so it's 7 years of experiments. So it sounded like a nice idea, but took 7 years. So that gives you. We said, all right, instead of giving the rat treats in virtual reality wherever he wants, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
make it just a little harder. So he's in this big virtual room, the size of an ordinary house, in which you put the keys. And we often forget where I put the keys. Where the hell did I put my cell phone? I ask that to myself, like God knows, million times a day. So unknown to him, we have buried a treat in one spot. And he's free to walk around in the virtual reality. We make sure he's comfortable and he has to find that treat. What we found was completely surprising. Instead of finding this place, first of all, we tested the rats in the same condition as we can test a human being. We can now lift this whole thing, put it around the human head, the same VR, can put it around in a clinic, in a patient who says, I have memory deficits. We can ask them to say, in this room, somewhere there is a reward. Walk around and find it. Once you find it, I'm going to ask you to go there again. Pretty complicated. Can they do it or not? Turns out Alzheimer's patients are actually lost in it. Mice too are now able to do it, but the nature of responses are completely different than what you see in the real world. That means that we can test the rats and mice using virtual reality in the same way that we'll test a human being in a clinic, and in the same style of memories, which are happy memories rather than fearful memories. That's a major breakthrough. So we believe that technology that we have now proven, it's no longer at the level of concepts, we have proven it, that if you test the rat in a task in which the memories are happy, such as where was food yesterday, the way in which hippocampus behaves is completely different than when you test it in some very fearful experience. Swim for your life or you're going to drown. We don't want to do that.
Mm.
If we now tested Alzheimer's drugs in this task, which is a happy memory task, we are now testing rats in the same condition as humans. We can screen a huge number of drugs very quickly because testing rats for drugs is much cheaper, by million times cheaper than testing it in humans. We can screen through the drugs much more quickly and find out which drugs are actually working in this virtual happy memory task in rats and mice. And then we try those in humans. That can speed up the drug discovery by hugely and make it cheaper. So that thing is ready to go. That's number one.
Got
Go
it.
ahead.
So that's awesome. So what you're saying is that you found that the way that was the gold standard of testing was basically inaccurate because the testing methods didn't trigger the right part of the brain, which is the main area of how they actually remembered. But the actual area that is being
Happy.
affected, the
Yeah.
happy memories where the plaque normally hits in the beginnings with the initial phases and those kinds of spots, that's where it's going to
That's
initially.
right.
So if we can test those areas and we can prove out that those areas are effective, we can stop it more or less at the source, or at least
Exactly.
the origins of where it happens. And so now you have a quicker methodology for testing and finding something
Exactly
effective
right.
in that area versus having to wait going all the way through to the fear sentence, which is actually a different spot of the brain,
Yeah.
which is why it doesn't make sense. You're basically testing. You're
Exactly.
it's just it's a wrong testing method. So I've got this light going on.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You can literally put the human being and the rat in exactly the same experience.
Commensurate
So
testing
the
systems.
big thing, so-called translation, we want to translate the basic research into therapies for human. The translation becomes very straightforward. It's exactly the same question. They're
Got it.
literally being asked to do the exact same
Do
question.
the
So
same
if it
test.
works in one, it's bound to work in another. So that's a huge thing,
Yeah.
which is ready to go right now. We are ready to work with pharmaceutical companies to let that happen right now. Share the knowledge, let everybody benefit. That's step number one. Now let's go to step number two. Can we now go and start using virtual reality not just for diagnosis and drug discovery, but actually see if I boost theta rhythm, if I boost the brain rhythms, and if I shut down neurons, does it have a lasting benefit or not? We can work with companies once again. We can take either ordinary human beings and check if I can improve the cognition of an ordinary human by calibrating a certain kind of virtual experience so that later on that human will actually be better. Is that true? And if the answer turns out that no, the human is not better, the human gets worse, well, we better know that too right now before all of us plug into VR in the metaverse and play that day and night. We think that there is going to be a VR that's going to be beneficial for sure. I'm totally gung ho about it, but we need to do that with rats first before we start plugging into humans. So that's number two, which we are ready to write. We know what biomarkers to look for, how many neurons are active, what's the rhythm, what's the frequency, very solid measures. We are ready to go. And then comes the science fiction, which is number three. So I told you the first two parts.
Sure.
The third part is the greatest abstraction that we are all making right? The greatest abstraction is mathematics. I believe in some sense, I'm biased. But if you look, if you're like most people, you're not a freak like me for whom math was just obvious. For most people, math is not obvious. And we know that a huge fraction of humanity right now is suffering because education is terrible. Kids don't even have access to textbooks. The teachers don't know. Maybe the right solution is to educate a huge number of teachers all across the world. So we get them access to Coursera from the top schools in the United States or Europe and let them all have that. But we know that if the instruction is only passive, it doesn't go far.
Yeah.
You got to actually experience it. Our brain is built to make sense of things we experience, not just things that are kind of bunch of words. We can now use virtual reality to make abstract ideas concrete without paying a ton of money. So,
Yeah.
to give you a simple idea, let's say I want to understand geometry. Geometry is about shapes. We can put VR headsets and create very funky sets of geometrical puzzles, which can be created for no money at all. I don't have to manufacture all kinds of toys and so on. I can morph the toys and I can teach geometry to a kid sitting in the same slum that I was born in without leaving from here. And most people have by now, not everybody, but a lot of people have cell phones. You can put Google Glass in it or more fancier VR sets and let them interact in VR and experience those amazing things, such as complicated shapes.
Mm.
They can get the same education as that is getting some kid gets in the most amazing private school in the United States. We can bring up vast majority of humanity which doesn't even have basic education to start learning these basic things. This is doable in 5 year time scale. If just a few sets of people who are well meaning get involved, we can
Mm.
teach them mathematics. And now we are boosting real intelligence. Before we go to artificial intelligence, we can boost real intelligence by teaching people complex things
Mm.
just by experience. This is doable.
Yeah. So then it's almost like you're saying that there's several things here, but one of the things being is that the best way for humans to learn is through experiential learning. The best type of
Yes,
experiential learning, the cheapest, most affordable, the most impactful, the one that we now have access to is the ability to actually experience it through the use of virtual reality. And whether that, and
that's
we
right.
can use the same type of thing if we're doing testing with the drugs by making
That's
the
right.
commensurate tests and the drugs, and then we can actually have a symbiotic relationship between the actual experiential learning and training and testing inside of VR, and then actually working with the drug facilities to actually say, okay, let's make better tests using using the technology that we have at hand versus these old archaic gold standards, because now we have better systems to test with. And so this is
That's right.
something that we can kind of build to. So if all of that's the case, then what is the what would I call the dragon that is preventing that from being successful? Like, what do you think is the biggest thing stopping this from actually happening?
In my opinion,
Mm.
it is it's getting the message out, really.
Mm.
The biggest hurdle is getting the message out. And the show that you're doing is one of the biggest service anybody can do to the society. Because these amazing findings that we have, they stay hidden in really complicated journal. More nobody can even access them. If they access it, they can't really even hold upside down, just like I won't be able to if I walked into another branch of science. So the biggest challenge is for us scientists to kind of share that idea in the language that people can understand. So if there are certain people who are listening to this show, so wait a minute, this thing sounds interesting. We begin a dialogue so that we can synergize, just like the brain has to synergize different senses. We got to synergize different human beings. If we can
Mm.
simply do that, we can start doing these things that
Mm.
most people don't realize. If I were to tell you right at the beginning of the show that give me money to understand how rat plays virtual reality and that'll benefit humanity, you're going to pull me out of here saying, get lost. There's some snake oil or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the deal. The breakthroughs come from many non-trivial directions. Benjamin Franklin was flying kites, and
Yeah.
now we can't live without electricity. So such examples are there plenty of them, and we need to communicate. That's the
Mm.
main thing. So
Yeah.
those people, we can now push this even beyond. So I can go one step to the very last step, which is where we started right at the beginning, the 10-year or maybe longer time scale. hopefully 10 years. I'm hoping it's 7, not even 10. But, we got to be
Yeah.
realistic.
Yeah, sure.
We got to. So if this is real, right? If
Mhm.
everything I'm saying, the science is real, the hypothesis still need to be tested fully. If that is true, if your neocortex and the hippocampus talking together are creating this amazing, weird thing called space and time and memories and events and all that stuff, then what we want to do is to figure out how the hell is that thing creating intelligence. Then we will know how does real intelligence work. And once we figure out the algorithm of the real intelligence, we can make the real AI, which is not just artificial, but it's a natural intelligence.
Yeah.
Now the two can work synergistically, and we can all prosper by plugging into the thing. When I
Yeah.
can't solve the problem, I just plug into that thing and let it solve the problem.
Yeah. I think Neuralink would definitely, with Elon Musk plugging into the brain, I think there's
Yeah,
something there with plugging into that
yeah,
stuff. I think this is incredible. And so and it's funny, yeah, because you're talking about give me money for rat virtual reality to benefit humanity. It's just a funny statement, just in general.
yeah.
But but it is but these unintuitive connections and synapse firings that causes, it's like a
That's right.
comedian. When you align up those things at the last spot, as you can see this light coming in on me, when it comes in on it, you make those, that it's that revelation that by
That's
taking
right.
multiple lenses and looking through the lenses, you actually come up with something that you couldn't get through if you only looked it through one myopic standard way of doing it, which is
Exactly.
drug therapy, which is beautiful. So with all of that being said, I'd like to come to a close of this podcast because it's been incredible talking with you. Could you please let people know how they can get a hold of you so they can find out more about what you do and look into more of the work that you've created?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm, all over the, we make sure that all the research that we have, we make
Hmm.
it available on our lab's website. I'm sure you will post it at some stage.
Hmm.
But my name is unique enough. So if you type Mayank Mehta, you'll find me on the web. Uh, I'm not, I wish I was John Smith, so nobody can find me. But I'm Mayank Mehta. And you type that or Mayank and UCLA, or I'm on Twitter.
Hmm.
We make all the videos available. You can watch the videos. Don't have to believe me. You can watch the rat play the virtual reality game. You can listen to individual neurons. You can listen to the rhythms of the neurons. You can read the press releases where we try to make this easily accessible. So that's the best way. And by all means, email me with your questions. I want to work with everybody because I'm sure I can learn a lot from others that I had never considered before. In fact, we are just getting ready to start, just getting started to start testing human beings. So we are venturing the human territory for the first time. I never thought I will do that, but we are getting ready to go there.
I love it. All right. Mayak, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the work that you're doing. And yes, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. So I will see you on the other side.
Absolutely. And keep up the good work. You're bringing people together. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Take care now. All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening. See you on the other side.